Let's move on. Their rival and a team that has beat them 2 straight years, has had the second best record in all of college football over the last 2 years, is Michigan. And here's Michigan in the news for all the wrong reasons after the 2 seasons that they had. Jim Harbaugh and his future at Michigan still uncertain after reports that he's been talking with, and even in one case with the Denver Broncos, interviewed for their vacant head coaching position. And this is all after there was a very serious flirtation last year with the Minnesota Vikings. And then after he did not get that job, he made it very clearly known to his bosses at Michigan and to everybody that it's like, that's done. I'm done with that. I'm no longer going to be seeking that out. And this is where I want to be. So why in the world is it still happening? Well, let's take a look at some of the reasons. I think Jim Harbaugh is doing everything he can to push his program, Michigan, in a positive direction. You might be thinking like, how in the world does interviewing with an NFL team push your program in a positive direction? Well, life is about leverage in a lot of ways. It is for me and my job, and it is for you and your job. The more leverage you can gain and value you can derive, then you can place that pressure on your employer to do things that you need them to do, or you can make your life easier, you can try to make more money, or you can push things that you care about further down the road. So let's step back from this for a moment. Michigan's returning a fabulous team. Really good team. Some of their best players were young players. They also had guys that are now deciding to come back. Blake Corum's coming back. Trevor Keegan's coming back. Zach Zinter is coming back. Cornelius Johnson is coming back. That's all on the offensive side. And all of those guys now will join a core of young players that was really great. J.J. McCarthy, the quarterback. Donovan Edwards, running back. Colston Loveland. By the way, this is happening on the defensive side as well. So they've got Sainristil still is coming back. Michael Barrett is coming back. They've got Junior Colson, a really good linebacker. They got Will Johnson, the corner, who's one of the best corners in the country. This is going to be a really good football team. They'll start in the top 4. In fact, in my way too early, top 10 for next year, I've got them at number 2. Georgia, Michigan, Ohio State, and Alabama are going to start as the top 4 teams in the country, at least in my estimation. And it's going to be hard for people not to put Michigan at number 2. Georgia will clearly be number 1, but Michigan number 2. So why is Jim Harbaugh flirting with leaving when he's got this returning? Well, it could be the point that we're at in college football, because the point that we're at in college football is a fork. It's a crossroads. There was a crossroads back in the early 2000s in our sport, and I believe that there is a fork, there's a crossroads now. These are major points that you have got to make a decision as a program. Are you evolving with the sport or are you not? I've talked about it on this podcast before, and I believe that Jim Harbaugh's flirtation with the NFL is a direct result of his desire to move Michigan and their football program along in the evolution of the sport. Get further commitments as far as investments into the staff. Get further commitments as far as investments into a collective and what's going on with the NIL. Because the fact remains is that if you look at the recruiting rankings, they weren't as good as you would probably expect for a team that just finished with the second best record in college football over the last 18 months. Well, part of that is because Michigan, in a lot of ways, loves to rely on their reputation and their tradition, which is immense. They're the winningest program in the history of college football. I get it, right? Like, I get it. I've been around Michigan a lot. And yes, you could and should rely on the tradition of your program. But that being said, one of the reasons why Michigan went through what they did in the last 15 years before Jim Harbaugh arrived in Ann Arbor was because at the last inflection point, they did not invest like other people did. It took them a while. They were behind. They were behind the eight ball, and it's taken Jim Harbaugh, 6, 7 long years to fight, scrap, pull, and get themselves back to the top, right? Back to the level where they think they're competing at the highest level in college football. And it's taken investment into the support staff. Well, so it was an arms race in the early 2000s, things like facilities and in particular, coaches' pay, how to retain coaches, multi-year contracts for assistant coaches, support staff around the program. It was investment, right, into the kind of the infrastructure, both physical and ancillary around the program. That's what was going on in the 2000s. The teams and programs that really invested heavily started to have a lot of success, right? How does Clemson do what they were able to do? Well, in many ways, they invested in their program. They invested in their culture, and it paid off for them. There were teams that did not do this. They did not invest in the facilities, and they did not invest in the staff and the ancillary staff as well, and they fell by the wayside, right? We all know that. Think about teams like, this is one of the reasons USC struggled for a long time. This is one of the reasons Miami has struggled. This is one of the reasons Florida State has struggled. And they've been trying to fight and claw and scratch and get themselves back to a place where they can compete on the highest level. One of the reasons Oregon is where Oregon is now is because at the last inflection point, they invested heavily into the facilities and the support of their program. Well, now the investment is just a little bit different. The sport's evolving. Now you've got to be ahead of the individual autonomy of the player, and you've got to be in line with where that's going, okay? And the teams and the programs that do evolve, they're going to be the ones that run the sport for the next 10, 15, and 20 years. And the ones that don't, that just rely on their tradition, are going to be left behind. So Jim Harbaugh knows this. He knows this. He's a really smart guy. And I'm not sure he loves NIL, but guess what? He knows that this is a big moment in college football. He knows what it took to get to this point where they've been to 2 straight playoff appearances. He knows what it's taken to beat Ohio State twice. And he wants assurances that we're going to invest at Michigan in order to move it forward and evolve with the sport and not behind the sport. That's my speculation of this whole thing. Why would he do this with a great team coming back after what happened last year and all these different things? He just wants support, and I think that he's going to eventually get it from the president of the university.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoy that clip, make sure you click subscribe somewhere down here. From game highlights to exclusive interviews and rankings, we've got everything you need as a college football fan right here, College Football on Fox.